Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. Our Bible teacher will be Gunther von Harringa Sr. In this series of studies, we will be focusing on the book of Judges. So without further ado, let's look into God's Word, the Bible.
Good evening and welcome to Searching the Scriptures. This is part 34 of chapter 3 in the book of Judges, and today's date is March 29th, 2017. I'll read verses 25 to 31 of this historical parable. And they tarried till they were ashamed, and behold, he opened not the doors of the parlor. Therefore they took a key and opened them. And behold, their Lord was fallen down dead on the earth. And Ehud escaped while they tarried, and passed beyond the quarries, and escaped unto Seirath. And it came to pass, when he was come, that he blew a trumpet in the mountain of Ephraim. And the children of Israel went down with him from the mount, and he before them. And he said unto them, Follow after me, for Jehovah hath delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. And they went down after him, and took the fords of Jordan toward Moab, and suffered not a man to pass over. And they slew of Moab at that time about 10,000 men, all lusty, and all men of valor. And there escaped not a man. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. And after him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, which slew of the Philistines 600 men with an ox goad, and he also delivered Israel. I want to make a correction before we start our lesson today regarding a point I made in our previous study, which was number 33. Regarding the word escape or deliver, when I quoted Jeremiah 38:18 and Jeremiah 51:6 and 45. I read Jeremiah 38:18 and made the comment that this would happen to those who insist on remaining in their local churches that came under the wrath of God. But if thou wilt not go forth to the king of Babylon's princes, then shall this city be given into the hand of the Chaldeans, and they shall burn it with fire, and they shall not escape out of their hand. And in Jeremiah 51:6 and in verse 45, there's a further warning to flee from God's judgment that first began at the house of God. Flee out of the midst of Babylon, and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of Jehovah's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense. And then verse 45, My people, go ye out of the midst of her, and deliver ye every man his soul from the fierce anger of Jehovah. By quoting these passages back to back, I might have given the impression that to flee the churches and denominations was equivalent to deliver every man his soul, which has to do with redemption. This is not the case at all, as physically leaving a local church would be considered a work. And we know that salvation is dependent not on our works, but on the work and faith of the Lord Jesus Christ. When believers understood the command to leave the churches and denominations, they did so out of obedience, and certainly not because that act could somehow provide them with the robe of Christ's righteousness. All right, let's get back to today's study then. We are at the word while they tarried. This is in verse 26, and Ehud escaped while they tarried. And in investigating this verse, we are attempting to unravel the spiritual meaning of Ehud's escape. That word escape is Strong's number 4422, which is actually mentioned twice in this verse, as I noted in our last study. The word while they tarried, 4102, is actually a different word than what we saw in verse 25, which was, and they tarried. It was Strong's number 2342, which we discovered was a term that actually had to do with pain or fear of those, of the non-elect, I should say, even though they might not even be aware of that pain or fear, because they are under the wrath of God in this prolonged day of judgment. This other word that we find here, while they tarried, in verse 26, is Strong's number 4102, and it conveys a delay or a passage of time, as these next citations reveal. As the word escape that we considered in our last study, this term also appears in Genesis 19:16 as lingered, having to do with Lot and his wife and his two daughters that left Sodom. And we read there, and while he lingered, this is Lot, the men lay hold upon his hand. These are the angels, the messengers, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters, Jehovah being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth and set him without or outside the city. We also find this term, 4422, in conjunction with Judges 19:8. And I mentioned this again previously because it had to do with the concubine who pictures the apostate corporate church. Again, Judges 19:8, and he, this would be the concubine's lord, arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. And the damsel's father said, comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they, this would be the concubine and her lord, tarried until afternoon, and they did eat both of them. In verse 9 of Isaiah 29, 1-14, it's rendered as stay. In this passage that again outlines God's judgment on the institutional churches and denominations, and here they're typified by Jerusalem or Ariel, as we find mentioned 5 times in this imprecation, which is further highlighted by the word woe. Woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add ye year to year. Let them kill sacrifices. Yet will I distress Ariel, and there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be unto me as Ariel. And I will camp against thee round about, and will lay siege against thee with a mount. And I will raise forts against thee, and thou shalt be brought down, and shall speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. Moreover, the multitude of thy strangers shall be like small dust, and the multitude of the terrible ones shall be as chaff that passeth away. Yea, it shall be at an instant, suddenly. Thou shalt be visited of Jehovah of hosts with thunder, and with earthquake, and great noise, with storm and tempest, and the flame of devouring fire. And the multitude of all the nations that fight against Ariel, even all that fight against her and her munition, and that distress her, shall be as a dream of a night vision. It shall even be as when an hungry man dreameth, and behold, he eateth, but he awaketh, and his soul is empty. Or as when a thirsty man dreameth, and behold, he drinketh, but he awaketh, and behold, he is faint, and his soul hath appetite. So shall the multitude of all the nations be that fight against Mount Zion. Stay yourselves and wonder. Cry ye out, and cry, they are drunken, but not with wine. They stagger, but not with strong drink. For Jehovah hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. The prophets and your rulers, the seers hath he covered. And the vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. Wherefore Jehovah said, Forasmuch as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. Verse 6 of this passage quotes Isaiah 6, 9 through 10, one of the most important verses in the entire Bible, and one that appears a half a dozen times in the New Testament, underscoring the spiritual blindness that God himself has brought upon this formerly divine institution, and the end result of that punishment is expressed in Isaiah 29:14b. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. Isaiah 6, 9 through 10 solemnly affirms, and he said, this is God speaking to Isaiah, Go and tell this people, Hear ye indeed, but understand not. And see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert, and be healed. One last passage we can consider is Habakkuk 2, verse 3, in which this term 4102 is translated as, though it tarry. There is another, it will not tarry, at the end of the verse, but it's a different word altogether. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. The next two words, and pass beyond the queries, are only found together in this English phrase. And you might recall we discovered that queries is only translated this way in Judges 3:19 and here in verse 26. The other 21 times in which it appears, it's rendered as graven images or carved images, as we see from Jeremiah 51, 47 to 58, in which God is judging Babylon, or the kingdom of Satan, and this term appears as upon the graven images and upon her graven images, respectively. And please note the recurring theme of God judging Babylon, which he had previously used to bring retribution against Israel, and Israel represents the churches and denominations of our day, during the 70-year Babylonian captivity. And then at the end of that period, having defeated Satan, and I mentioned that in a previous study, that spiritually he is represented by Eglon in this account in Judges 3. After that, he then judges Babylon, as verse 49 maintains so clearly. Therefore, behold, the days come that I will do judgment upon the graven images of Babylon, and her whole land shall be confounded, and all her slain shall fall in the midst of her. Then the heaven and the earth, and all that is therein, shall sing for Babylon. For the spoiler shall come unto her from the north, saith Jehovah. As Babylon hath caused the slain of Israel to fall, so at Babylon shall fall the slain of all the earth. Ye that have escaped the sword, go away, stand not still. Remember Jehovah afar off, and let Jerusalem come into your mind. We are confounded because we have heard reproach. Shame hath covered our faces, for strangers are come into the sanctuaries of Jehovah's house. Wherefore, behold, the days come, saith Jehovah, that I will do judgment upon her graven images, and through all her land the wounded shall groan. Though Babylon should mount up to heaven, and though she should fortify the height of her strength, yet from me shall spoilers come unto her, saith Jehovah. A sound of a cry cometh from Babylon, and great destruction from the land of the Chaldeans, because Jehovah hath spoiled Babylon, and destroyed out of her the great voice. When her waves do roar like great waters, a noise of their voice is uttered. Because the spoiler is come upon her, even upon Babylon, and her mighty men are taken. Every one of their bows is broken. For Jehovah God of recompenses shall surely requite. And I will make drunk her princes and her wise men, her captains and her rulers, and her mighty men, and they shall sleep a perpetual sleep, and not wake, saith the King, whose name is Jehovah of hosts. Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the broad walls of Babylon shall be utterly broken, and her high gates shall be burned with fire, and the people shall labor in vain, and the folk in the fire, and they shall be weary. So how are we to understand that Ehud, the deliverer, and he typifies Christ, passed beyond these graven images, the quarries, and escaped unto Seirath? We've already discussed the term escaped or delivered, so let's investigate the words passed beyond and also Seirath. Passed beyond is Strong's number 5674, and it's a common word found over 500 times in the Old Testament and translated in numerous ways, and usually as some form of pass over, pass by, etc. It surfaces all throughout the book of Judges, and there is one passage that is noteworthy found in Judges 2:20, where it is rendered as hath transgressed. And we saw this when we were in chapter 2 of the book of Judges. And the anger of Jehovah was hot against Israel. And he said, because that this people hath transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice. Here it's this word, hath transgressed. This is also the way some of these next passages, and again, they're relatively few, where it's rendered as transgress. But I think that understanding this, of this shade of meaning, I think will help us to overall see the spiritual picture that God is trying to paint here. In verse 24 of 1 Samuel 2, 22 to 25, we encounter Eli's weak reproof of his wicked sons' behavior, and they were priests in the temple. Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he said unto them, Why do ye such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. Ye make the Lord's people to transgress. And this is the word 5674, to transgress. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against Jehovah, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding, they hearken not unto the voice of their father, because Jehovah would slay them. And of course, that whole episode is really another historical parable having to do with the end of the church age. We also see this word in conjunction with King Saul, who was admitting his sin to the prophet Samuel in 1 Samuel 15:24. And Saul said unto Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of Jehovah and thy words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Well, let's look at a few more scriptures, and then we're going to have to end our study today. If we go to Hosea 8:1, we find this announcement, Set the trumpet to thy mouth. He shall come as an eagle against the house of Jehovah, because they have transgressed. Again, that's our word, 5674. Because they have transgressed my covenant and trespassed against my law. Jonah 2:3 is another most interesting verse where this term is rendered passed over. For thou hadst cast me into the deep, in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about. All thy billows and thy waves passed over me. And we know that this is a picture of Christ undergoing the wrath of God in the belly of the whale, which is the belly of hell. And this has to do with Christ being slain from the foundation of the world. Now, Micah 7:18 is a little different, because here this term, which we've seen in a number of places, is talking about transgression. This is actually underscoring God's mercy during the day of salvation, which lasted 13,023 years. Who is a God like unto thee, that pardoneth iniquity and passeth by? This is how it's translated here, and passeth by the transgression of the remnant of his heritage. He retaineth not his anger forever, because he delighteth in mercy. Well, on that wonderful note, we will have to bring today's study to a close. Lord willing, we will continue examining this fascinating historical parable in our next study.
Thank you for joining us today for Searching the Scriptures. Until next time, to God be the glory.